either one of the measures. I think it'll only be 15 or 20 minutes at most.
Okay.
Hey, Keith.
Hey, Joe. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Good. Short week, so we're trying to cram a lot of stuff in.
Understood.
All right. What time? Mr. Carter, wait, I'm waiting to pull that up. Let's wait 2 minutes, y'all. Or just, I'll read it from there. Okay, Mr. Carter, do we have a quorum? Are we ready for roll call?
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and do roll call, please. Mr. Carter, roll call.
To the September 9th, 2020 Transportation Public Works Committee meeting for Transportation Committee. We have Councilmember Palmer, Chair, present, Councilmember Russo present, Councilmember Benton present. For the Public Works Sanitation Environment Committee, we have Councilmember Russo, Chair, present, and Councilmember Palmer present.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so before we go right into this joint session between Public Works and Transportation, I would just like to make our opening comments regarding COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to preclude us from meeting safely in a public forum. We must therefore continue to operate in this virtual fashion using the public comment guidelines outlined by the Louisiana Attorney General. Here are the public comment rules that we will follow today. At the beginning of the meeting, staff will read the agenda for today's meeting in its entirety. That agenda is also online at counsel.nola.gov. We will then recess for 10 minutes to allow citizens to submit written comments for any of the agenda items. Anyone wishing to comment should go to counsel.nola.gov and fill out an online public comment form. Only written public comments will be accepted. Public comment will be limited to 1 comment per person per item. Comments should also be limited to 2 minutes when read aloud and be germane to the agenda item at hand. Public comment will be closed at the end of the 20-minute public comment period. No written comments will be accepted beyond that point. Before voting on an agenda item, council staff will read any public comment received for a pending agenda item. Mr. Carter, first, could you please note that Councilmember Jade Banks has joined us. I'm sorry? And that counts as a quorum. Thank you, Councilmember Banks, for joining us. All right, Mr. Carter, can you please read the agenda in full?
Agenda item 1, roll call. Agenda item 2, recess to receive public comment. Agenda item 3, approval of the minutes from the July 22nd Public Works Sanitation Environment Committee meeting. Agenda item 4, ordinance calendar number 33,007, ordinance to amend and reorganize sections 154-1561 Code of the City of Warrens relative to clarifying truck routes and otherwise to provide respect to. Agenda item 5, complete streets ordinance implementation, subsection A, discussion of amendments to calendar number 28,766. And subsection B, discussion of climate policy protocols and public participation in appropriations. Agenda item 6, discussion of ordinance calendar number 33,002, an ordinance to ordain sections 154-547 and 154-1203 of the Code of the City of Warrens relative to establishing numerous slow zones and otherwise to provide respect to. Agenda item 7, presentation and discussion of the Department of Public Works, current status and scope of Jade projects citywide. And agenda item 8, adjournment.
Thank you. I think it's my understanding before we break for a 20-minute recess, Councilmember Jeruso, did you want to move the agenda item forward on anything, or is this the proper order?
No, I was asking if we could do complete streets first, once we came back from the break.
Sure, that's fine.
Thank
Okay,
you very much.
for members of the public, just so you know, we will take item of complete streets ordinance implementation first when we come back from our public comment period. Okay? All right, with that, I'd take a motion to adjourn to receive public comment.
So moved.
So moved, seconded. I will second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. We're adjourned for 20 minutes to receive public comment. What did you say?
Council member, you're still muted.
There we go. Is everybody else back? Councilmember Banks, there we are. Let's go ahead because I signed this out. Let's kind of make a move to start back up. So I move to restart the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
To come back into session? Second by Councilmember Nguyen. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Great. We are back in the meeting. So I'm sorry, Mr. Carter? Yeah, go ahead and play call roll. We got a couple new ones.
Councilmember Caruso,
I'm here.
Councilmember Williams,
I saw him earlier.
Councilmember Moreno,
Here.
Councilmember Banks.
He was just there and he was waving.
Councilmember Palmer, present.
Present.
Councilmember Olsen. Councilmember Williams, present. So we have at least 5 members.
Great, thank you so much. So at the request of Councilman Jeruso, we're going to move up and do the Complete Streets Ordinance implementation first. Do we have the administration online? They're supposed to join at what? 3:20. Okay, it's 3:33.
Council member, this is Dan Jotris with the Office of Transportation. I'm here.
Great, thank you so much. Dan, did you want to go over this agenda item, please, and bring everybody up to speed on the policy memorandum number 134 regarding Complete Streets policy and implementation?
Yes, I'm happy to. There's a presentation. Is it up on the screen for people to see?
We appear to have some, is Kenny up there? Paul, has Paul done it? Paul has to share it. Thank you, Kenny.
Give me 1 second. Dan, I don't have a copy of the presentation, but if you have it, I can allow you to share your screen if you want to do it that way.
Sure.
Paul, we just sent you the copy again.
All right, well, once I get it, we can do it either way you want, Dan. You can advance it or I can.
It really doesn't matter to me, whichever one is quickest for us right now.
There we go. All right, Dan, we're turning it over to you. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. And just, I just would like y'all to know that this agenda item is for information only and there's no action required. But we would like to discuss it a little bit further. So Dan, please.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Palmer. members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come and update you on the Complete Streets policy. We last spoke with all of you at the July Joint Public Works and Transportation Committee, and this is an update on the progress since that time. Starting off, I just wanted to briefly recap where we are. If we go to the next slide. Complete Streets in New Orleans, it began with the adoption of the Complete Streets Ordinance in 2011. That was later then, as part of the implementation process of that ordinance, the original CAO policy was crafted in 2015. When Mayor Cantrell took office in 2018, we were continuing to implement a Complete Streets policy in our road projects, but also presented with the opportunity to amend and update the 2015 policy to ensure that it was continuing to guide the decisions and the process consistent with the goals of the city and the goals laid out in the Moving New Orleans Transportation Action Plan. Next slide, please. So the updates to the policy that we've made here for this year in 2020, a couple of the highlights of where those changes really come into play are visible right now. And that includes implementation metrics and reporting protocol, integrating a community engagement protocol for different scales of projects, establishing specific responsibilities for the Complete Streets Working Group, connecting the Complete Streets policy to other city efforts, for example, public health or economic development and resilience, and specifically defining categories of exceptions to the policy. I'm going to go more in depth in each of these areas on the next couple slides. So next up on implementation metrics and reporting protocol, the policy will require an annual report be prepared for the CEO by the Department of Public Works. That report will address the current and planned. Yes.
Dan, regarding that,
Yes.
how is that going to be noticed? Because it does not state within the policy. Will it be shared?
I'm sorry?
The annual written report, how will it be shared with the public?
It will be available on the city's website, and I'm sure that members of this committee and the council at large will be interested in hearing that, and we are happy to speak at future committee meetings to present that report as well.
Yeah, I just think at some point it needs to also state within the policy that it will be shared with the public and how.
Okay, thank you for that feedback.
Can I ask a question about that? I think
Yeah.
it's along the same lines. So two things. One is I think the policy speaks to that Roadworks NOLA will have a lot of this information and also upcoming meetings. Can we just put it on the Roadworks website, Dan, when it gets up? So that way there's a section where we can direct people, the administration, for looking for that information.
Yeah, in addition to the annual report, there's going to be a dashboard that provides more real-time updates on individual projects. So that will be available through Roadwork and DPW's websites. So that'll be there throughout the process or throughout the year, and then there'll be the compiled annual report that will then also be available through linked through all those websites, so that it is easily discoverable by the public, no matter how they come, whether to NOLA.gov or to Roadwork or to DPW's website directly. So that annual report will address current and planned program goals, objectives, metrics, and achievements. And those metrics will measure things like inputs such as design guidance or staff training, outputs, which could include things like miles of sidewalks or the number of transit shelters. Short-term impacts would be things like usage of transportation facilities or crash numbers. And long-term impacts would be things like changes in physical activity or access to jobs. And then the report will also include a listing of any exceptions that were made to the policy per the exceptions guidance in section 6 of the policy.
I got a question about the exemption policy.
Yes.
How does that happen? Who is the final say for an exemption?
It would be typically the director of the Department of Public Works. If it's a project that's not being driven by Public Works, it would be the department director of the relevant department.
Okay, and at any point is the Complete Streets working group, do they have any input on whether or not a project is approved or not, or taken, I'm sorry, not approved, but taken out?
So the working group serves in an advisory role, so they can provide input and advice to department directors, but the working group itself does not have official approval authority on whether an exception is granted to any particular project.
Are we concerned that
And that's
there's,
consistent with the city charter.
okay, are we concerned that in terms of the exemptions to the policy that there's, I don't want to say a loophole, but the fact of the matter is it's all done in-house, correct? And there's no system of checks and balances?
They're crafted to be very tight so that there's not a lot of room for exceptions to be made. And in a few slides, we'll get to what those exceptions are, but they are consistent with what are identified in the existing ordinance in city code of the allowable exceptions to the Complete Streets approach.
Yeah, no.
So basically, I'm
okay.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just at that page right now. It doesn't really necessarily state how that occurs, exemptions occur. And who is responsible for those exemptions? I guess it just, if you wouldn't mind just kind of spelling that out a little bit more within the policy memorandum so we know.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. We can move to the next slide, I believe.
Yes.
So the community engagement protocol. This is when there is a project that involves a major operational change. This protocol requires at least one public meeting during the design phase for that project. The protocol also requires that we provide at least 2 weeks notification to the public prior to that meeting being held. And that notification could include any one of the one or a combination of methods, such as postcards, neighborhood canvassing, social media, messaging through partner organizations, neighborhood associations, et cetera, within a reasonably impacted area around the project. And then the protocol also requires that all the public meeting content is posted to the city's website for transparency and allow people that weren't able to participate in the public meeting to get the same information that was shared at the meeting.
Dan, can I ask 2 questions here? On
Yes,
the
Counsel.
third one, would it be possible if a primary medium is picked that also an email to the neighborhood association or associations of record is also sent, so that way they can get it to their distribution lists, which are often wider than the ones that anybody has? And then secondly, this is great for things the city wants to change before it happens, and that's something that's been important to me and to us. What happens if somebody proactively wants to initiate the process, though? Like, we have neighbors the Faubourg side of Moss Street who are interested in some signage and striping and some things that would slow things down. And it may not be a major operational change, but how do they start that process as a part of Complete Streets?
Sure. So I can answer your first question or comment quickly. That notification of the neighborhood organizations is part of the existing process through neighborhood engagement. So that will continue as part of this protocol as well, making sure that those neighborhood associations get the notice so that they can amplify the messaging through their mailing lists, their social media presence, et cetera. In terms of a neighborhood grassroots proposal involving the streets and a change that would be a major operational change or not, engaging or those ideas can come in through a multitude of avenues. It could come in through the neighborhood engagement office. It could come in through communications from the council offices, or it could be outreach directly to the Department of Public Works or the Office of Transportation. Ultimately, if that neighborhood-driven proposal is going to move forward towards a project and it does involve a major operational change, then it would still it would trigger this protocol and involve a public meeting to go over what the proposed design would be and allow an opportunity for people to further engage on that, especially if they were not involved in the original grassroots push behind the idea.
Thank you.
Sure thing, my pleasure.
And Dan, can I ask one other thing? Like in terms of outreach, is there sort of an idea, almost MPP, like 300 feet from a project? What becomes the right amount of people to touch in terms of neighborhood canvassing or partner organizations, postcards? What is the thought process there?
Yeah, obviously, some of these are have larger budgetary costs, the postcards most specifically. So for postcards, we've been sending them to people that live along the impacted corridor or to addresses along the impacted corridor, whether that's residential or commercial. It's to every address, as well as the addresses within 2 blocks of the corridor. For the other forms of outreach, you know, the sky is kind of the limit, depending on where people on mailing lists are or where people are interacting with social media posts. So that helps capture a broader scale of the neighborhood to even reaching, you know, people across the city, whether they're directly adjacent to a project corridor or not.
Thank you.
Sure thing. We can move to the next slide. So the working group, we mentioned this a little bit already. What the Complete Streets Working Group serves as in an advisory role, and that's consistent with the city's charter, to provide input for the policies, procedures, and regulations developed within the context of the Complete Streets program. This working group will be chaired by the director of the Mayor's Office of Transportation or their designee, and it will be comprised of at least 10 standing members from a variety of city departments and stakeholders. That includes the Department of Public Works, the City Planning Commission, Capital Projects Administration, the Health Department, New Orleans Police Department, Office of Neighborhood Engagement, Department of Parks and Parkways, Sewer and Water Board, and the RTA. As well as community stakeholders. And then some projects may necessitate bringing in other constituencies. The policy does allow, it's not a entirely static membership. So for example, a project that involves a state highway, we would want to make sure that the working group is engaging with the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development to ensure that we're getting their input to make sure that a project is properly navigating through DOTD's various requirements and processes. And then the working group section also establishes tasks where the working group can assist and make recommendations to the Department of Public Works relative to Complete Streets. So some examples of that are the working group providing recommendations on the evaluation and metrics that would be created to track the impacts of the Complete Streets program, or making recommendations around our equity-focused project selection, which is consistent with our equity focus from the Moving New Orleans Transportation Action Plan. Or, for example, the working group could help identify and recommend opportunities for staff training. The next slide, please. So these are not all new, but some of them have been added, some have been modified from the 2015 version of the policy, but basically laying out what the policy goals are for Complete Streets, and there's 9 of them. And that's safety, connectivity, evaluation, multimodal accommodation, economic development, livable communities, equity, coordination, and sustainability and resilience. And you'll see, several of these policy goals are clearly linked into other activities that the city is pursuing. There's a lot of opportunity for the investments that we make into our public right-of-way to be coordinated with and support other efforts that the city is engaged in through other departments or through other partners in the community. We want to ensure that the investments that we're making in our streets, we can maximize that return by having that coordination, having those, breaking down those silos, and making sure that when we have goals that stretch across multiple areas, that our projects are being implemented in such a way.
Dan, just real quick, under definite, how is the administration going to define equity? And if it could be placed under definitions, I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, so
I would, of course, I'm going to make this plug for myself and Councilmember Nguyen, but I also think geographic equity needs to be included in this, in terms of making sure areas of the city that have not had that same kind of, excuse me, infrastructure impacts are at the table. I know this administration has been incredibly thoughtful about ensuring other parts of the city are at the table, and we see that in Algiers with the bike network, which is fantastic. I just want to make sure that if we're memorializing this for future administrations, that we put that in there as well.
Yes, equity is definitely very important, and certainly one of our key goals. I know I've referenced the Moving New Orleans plan several times. Equity is one of the 4 guiding themes of that plan. So it is core to the administration's approach to transportation. And one of the early on tasks that we want to involve the working group in is defining what that equity approach looks like. Because as you said, there are so many different ways that equity can be defined. So we want to make sure that we define it in a way that all of our stakeholders, both within city government and within the community, see equity being defined the way they think it needs to be defined to get what we want to get out of these projects and this approach to projects. We move on to the next slide then. And then coming back, we mentioned this a few minutes ago, the policy exceptions. It's laying out 5 specific circumstances where the Complete Streets policy can be accepted. It's not automatic. It can be, it still needs to be documented. It needs to be approved. And these exceptions are consistent with those that are specifically listed in the Complete Streets ordinance itself. And those exceptions are where specific users are prohibited. For example, interstate highways, people walking and biking are prohibited from interstates. So a project on the interstate would not have to follow a Complete Streets approach. Where the cost is excessively disproportionate to the need or the probable use, where there's a documented absence of current and or future need, and that documentation would include showing that that compliance with the policy would not change that future need.
Can you give an example? I'm sorry, Dan, to interrupt you, but can you give an example of what that document absence of current or future needs would look like? What does that mean?
Sure. I think if we want to pick an example from District C, in Lower Coast Algiers along LA 406, where there's no section where there's not any development currently. If there's not future development planned there, then there'd be documentation to show why construction of a sidewalk is not necessary, because there's just not this current or future need for such a facility.
Got it. And then also, I'm sorry, can you explain to what constitutes a disproportionate cost?
Yeah, so we did not define a specific number so that context-sensitive approaches could be taken. The federal government, Federal Highway Administration, in their recommendations around complete streets, they have put a number at 20% as being a disproportionate cost. We wanted to have a little more open-ended. Again, like I said, these exceptions aren't meant to be automatic. They're if a project triggers one of these, then the exception could be put in place, but we still want it to be sensitive to the specific needs and circumstances of any project.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then concluding out the list of exceptions, emergency repairs requiring an immediate and rapid response, and routine maintenance that would not change roadway geometry or operations. So the next slide then. So what is our implementation process, our progress right now? The Department of Public Works is currently following the new community engagement protocol. Councilmember Druso earlier asked about the radius that has been used or would be reasonable for postcards. So I referenced what we've been currently doing. That's on projects happening right now, such as the Central City, Martin Luther King Boulevard project, or some of the Moving New Orleans Bikes projects taking place in Algiers and the Marigny. Public Works' Mobility and Safety Unit is reviewing street projects for complete streets implementation requirements. And Public Works is coordinating with other departments like Office of Transportation, Neighborhood Engagement, and Roadwork to ensure that neighborhoods are notified about upcoming projects and the scopes of those projects, what kinds of elements are being included in those projects. And then DPW, again, we referenced this a little bit earlier, is integrating complete streets metrics into its centralized dashboard. So in addition to the annual report that this policy calls for, there will be this dashboard that is live throughout the year, in which updates around the Complete Streets program and the metrics measuring the impacts of the program will be available for the public to see and interact with, to have an understanding and sense of the progress that we're making on individual projects and holistically from our Complete Streets approach. Next slide. And then our next steps will be the final review and adoption of the amended policy. We're hoping to do that between now and the end of September. Then we will look to convene the Complete Streets Working Group starting in October and having quarterly meetings of that working group. They will be involved in providing recommendations on the next step, which will be developing the evaluation framework with our performance metrics. And then, excuse me, and that'll be done over a 6-month period of time, which is outlined in the policy, for us to reach a point where we have developed an updated Complete Streets program based on the changes encapsulated in this revised policy. So that is our updates on Complete Streets, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that you guys have today.
Thank you. Council members, do you have any direct questions? We also, I know, have quite a few public comment cards. So Councilor Madruso.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got to run in 1 second for just a few minutes, but I just want to say thanks to Dan and to the administration for putting this together, and that we had made revisions to the Complete Streets ordinance that was passed before the policy was put in place, and now we're going to go and tweak those so they align with everything, and it's all codified in the same place. So thanks very much, Dan, for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, council member.
Thank you, Councilor Madruso. Any other council members? No? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to public comment cards. I think Andrew Sullivan has those, and we will wait to hear.
Yep, ready to go. First comment is from Tara Tolford, not a paid representative. UNO Transportation Institute commends the council and the mayor's office of transportation for recommitting to the full transparent implementation of the city's Complete Streets ordinance and is in support of proposed updates to the CAO memorandum to align the policy to current goals and conditions. We would like to emphasize the importance of clearly defined and equity-centered performance metrics, transparency in how projects are selected and designed, and a robust and inclusive public process in all phases of project scoping and delivery, including and especially in cases where policy exemptions are granted. We urge the council to encourage the administration to quickly adopt a revised policy and convene the working group tasked with developing the evaluation framework so as to move these important implementation steps forward without further delay. The next comment is from Ann Byerly, not a paid representative. Please support legislation to improve car driving habits of New Orleanians. We need more support of efforts to reduce car traffic in New Orleans. We need more efforts to keep the air fresh and clear in New Orleans with more cars staying at home during working hours. New Orleanians learn bad driving habits and never correct their behavior. Road rage develops when they are at fault for creating the problem. Get more bikes on the streets and improve the health and safety of New Orleans residents. Next comment is from Rosary Beck, not a paid representative. My husband and I retired to New Orleans for its charm and quality of life and to live a walkable life, ride bikes, and use public transportation. Please ensure that all city-owned streets will be designed and built for the safety and access of every person using a street. Thank you. Next comment is from Tina Freeman, not a paid representative. New Orleans is the perfect city to bike in. I feel that more bike lanes will make the city safer for all. I support the Complete Streets program. As a person that bikes, I would feel safer if more streets had bike lanes. The next comment is from Tess Fulton, not a paid representative. As a bicyclist, I am horrified at the recent spate of deaths. Every day when I bike to work, I worry that I will not make it home again. We cannot continue any longer without improving the safety of our streets. People are being murdered in broad daylight. To make it even worse, we know what to do to protect them. Fix the streets. Please do something. The next comment is from Heather Halen, not a paid representative. I have lived without a car for the last 3 years and rely on my bike for transportation. Biking is also an inherently joyful activity, but truthfully, it is anxiety-inducing when there isn't a clear way to share the road. No one should live in fear while trying to access healthcare, food, schools, and other resources when traveling by foot, bike, or public transportation. I support a Complete Streets policy for New Orleans that is backed by data and encompasses all communities. Next comment is Elizabeth Bobo, not a paid representative. I'm writing in favor of a data-driven, equity-focused, Complete Streets policy for the city of New Orleans to better protect and serve our residents. I was once hit on my bike half a block from a Blue Bikes hub, but where there was no bike lane. I know my trip to the ER could have been prevented, along with the countless fatal crashes unnecessarily taking the lives of our neighbors. I hope for further clarification within the city's Complete Streets policies to detail several things. A clearer definition of equity and how it will be achieved, an accountable exemptions process, an empowered working group. Thank you. Next comment is from Bruce Gebhardt, not a paid representative. Over the last days and weeks, at least 3 people biking or walking have been killed in crashes across the greater New Orleans region. 2 more were killed on roads with planned or postponed Complete Streets renovations that might have made a difference for their safety. A good and well-implemented Complete Streets policy in New Orleans will, moving forward, ensure that all city-owned streets will be designed and built for safety and access of every person using the street, people walking, biking, driving, or riding transit. The next comment is from Jeanette Gustat, not a paid representative. A public health researcher who emphasizes a data-driven, as a public health researcher who emphasizes a data-driven approach to public health and safety, Complete Streets programs are an easy win. Data has shown time and time again that Complete Streets policies can benefit all members of communities and make the streets safer for all. In order for this to happen, it is important that the Complete Streets policies for New Orleans include a clear definition of equity and how that is to be measured. Stating that certain metrics such as race, income, and ADA access will be examined with the policy as a first step. Making sure Complete Streets projects benefit all neighborhoods is important as well. Tracking distance from a transit line or a park or a grocery store and how those distances have changed with the policy is a possible measure of success. An empowered working group for the policy that meets regularly could be tasked with monitoring equity and tracking progress of the policy over time. A review for the exemptions process could be conducted with the working group. The working group will need the authority to make recommendations regarding the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the policy to an accountable office or public appointee. I applaud New Orleans City Council for already supporting the efforts to make the streets of New Orleans safer. I wish them success in continuing to do this. I recommend that City Council adopt a data-driven, equity-focused, Complete Streets policy for New Orleans. Sincerely, Jeanette Gustat, PhD, MPH, public health researcher and epidemiologist. The next comment is from Alexander Fleming, not a paid representative. As someone who makes and puts up the ghost bikes dedicated to our fallen cyclists, I'm begging all of you to pass this. Listen to us. Please respect us. Too many have died. We obey the rules of the road. We wear helmets, lights, and we cyclists are still dying. The next comment is from Roger Wheaton, not a paid representative. One of the unexpected benefits of the COVID-19 pandemic is the public embrace of biking in New Orleans. Lots of new bikers, so the numbers have increased. The bikers are gravitating towards the new sheltered bike paths. The mix of people biking has become much more diverse. It is nice to see such positive changes in our community. The next comment is from Michelle Tullo, not a paid representative. I do not have a car and bike or walk everywhere. Even when following all the rules of the road, I regularly, if not daily, have dangerous encounters with vehicles. I strongly support this Complete Streets ordinance. Although we have had a Complete Streets policy for years, the ordinance can hasten an equitable and accountable policy implementation. Walking to the store or biking to work shouldn't be a life-endangering activity. The next comment is from Tom Peralt, not a paid representative. A good and well-implemented Complete Streets policy in New Orleans will, moving forward, ensure that all city-owned streets will be designed and built for the safety and access of every person using a street, people walking, biking, driving, or riding transit. Not just that. Green infrastructure, sustainability, equity, and transparency are the hallmarks of how Complete Streets policies ensure communities' immediate and long-term needs. We need, one, a clear definition of equity and how it will be achieved. The proposed policy mentions equity quite often, but we are unclear what the city means by the term. We believe equity must mean measuring particular data, such as race, income, ADA access, distance from a transit line or a park or a grocery store, etc. Two, an accountable exemptions process. A policy about public works will include some exemptions. What's needed is accountability for the process of granting them. An office or public appointee needs to be clearly accountable in case exemptions are abused. Three, an empowered working group. The city proposes to include many stakeholders in a working group tasked with following this new policy in order to create the new Complete Streets program, containing the various processes necessary to actually build streets. What Complete Streets will look like in New Orleans, what is measured, and ultimately who they will serve depends on how well the working group establishes the program. As an example, to ensure walking safety is properly addressed, local walking advocates should not only be included in the working group, but empowered to insist that sidewalk maintenance and miles of walking trails are tracked within the city's evaluation framework. The next comment is from Joel Hockman, not a paid representative. Please do this right. Too many bicyclists have been killed on New Orleans streets. Strong biking infrastructure is always good for a city. Let's let New Orleans be a leader. The next comment is from Jane Corey Sherman, not a paid representative. I am in favor of the Complete Streets project and full protection of bikers. Next comment is from Beth Inbow, not a paid representative. We support the position of the New Orleans Complete Streets Coalition and Bike Easy to make NOLA safer for cyclists and pedestrians. Thank you for your consideration. Next comment is from Laura Thornton, not a paid representative. Members of the Transportation and Public Works Committees, I urge you to support the Complete Streets policy and emphasize the importance of clearly defining core aspects of this policy. specifically by measuring equity across multiple domains, including race, ADA accessibility, income, distance to groceries with high quality foods, and any other domains that emerge as critically important to consider. Moreover, I urge the committees to ensure the working group is equitable and holds transparency and accountability as foundational rules. Last, I urge the committee to ensure that the exemption process also follows the same transparency and accountability of the working group. Thank you for working to make our streets safer for all who use them. This work has the potential not only to improve the quality of life for all New Orleanians, but save lives as well. Thank you for your consideration. Laura C. Thornton, PhD. The next comment is from Marcel Charbonnet, not a paid representative. I like to see New Orleans expand its bike network, especially connecting the existing fragmented routes and installing more protected bike lanes, paths, and traffic calming. The next comment is from Christopher Englund, not a paid representative. The lack of complete streets in New Orleans doesn't just kill people suddenly in jarring accidents that produce headlines. It kills people slowly with pollution and sedentary lifestyles. It kills neighborhoods in our community with congestions and cars first mentality. And it heavily subsidizes a system that is inherently inequitable by favoring those who have the money to purchase and operate a vehicle. I am strongly for the Complete Streets initiative because it breaks the monopoly cars have on our public spaces and provides for the varied ways our city actually gets around town. It decreases congestion and pollution when more people walk, bike, or take public transit. And it provides avenues of opportunity for those of us who have systematically been denied opportunities, been redlined out of certain neighborhoods, and been underserved by public infrastructure. During the first phase of the COVID restrictions, I saw so many more people out walking and biking, and it quickly became clear that there just wasn't enough sidewalk to share, let alone to maintain social distancing. Combined with the drop in vehicular traffic, many of us took to the streets, literally walking in the roadway. It felt weird, but not because we were transgressing and walking where cars typically ran, but because it felt like our neighborhood was both bigger, because we had reclaimed a space that was previously off limits, and more of a community because we saw so many more of our neighbors. It gave me a taste of what it would be like to live in a city with complete streets, and it was great. The next comment is by Carlos Stitch, not a paid representative. I would like to see more data-driven, equity-focused street policy in the city of New Orleans. It is so dangerous to walk, bike in this city. We need to stop prioritizing cars. The next comment is from Katie Mancine, not a paid representative. Help save lives and make everyone's commute easier by installing protected bike lanes. I have been car doored here twice in 3 years. That's when someone opens a car door without looking and a bicyclist slams into it. The second time it happened, the frame of my bike broke. I am lucky to have not broken anything on my body. With protected bike lanes, this would not happen. But forget car doorings, protected bike lanes could save lives. At this point, New Orleans is behind compared to many other cities when it comes to protecting their bicyclist lives, which is a shame. We live in a city that is flat with weather perfect for biking year round. Please, please, protected bike lanes, please. Next comment is by Gregory Brown, not a paid representative. Please implement a good complete streets policy in New Orleans, which will, moving forward, ensure that all city-owned streets will be designed and built for safety and access of every person using the street. People walking, biking, driving, or riding transit. Not just that. Green infrastructure, sustainability, equity, and transparency are the hallmarks of how complete streets policy ensure communities' immediate and long-term needs. This will help to make NOLA a landmark destination for biking, and perhaps we could plan an annual Tour de NOLA. Next comment is from Jeffrey Vitter, not a paid representative. I would like to make an urgent plea to get things going on the off-road bike path along Marconi from Zachary Taylor to Harrison. The state of Louisiana has allocated the money, and this section of pathway would make the rest of the city park pathways more usable, because right now it is a glaring hole in the city park pathway system. The rest of Marconi has a bike path with this chunk in the middle missing. The alternative of driving on Marconi is very dangerous. You are asking for people to be killed. Given that the planning has been done and money allocated, I hope you make it an immediate priority to get that bike pathway built. The mayor's office was explicitly requested a year ago to get going on this project, and I am hereby making another request. Next comment is Marissa Nell, not a paid representative. New Orleans is behind other cities in regards to bicycle infrastructure. I'm afraid of being hit by a car every time I ride. I know people have died on roads here. People on bikes and people who walk deserve the same access to streets, space as people in cars. I hope these improvements continue. Next comment is by James O'Brien, not a paid representative. I love to ride my bike in New Orleans, and I ride it not just for fun, but to get somewhere and to run errands. For example, today I have a dental appointment at CBD Dental, and I will ride my bike there. I see more and more people in New Orleans riding bikes, which is great for the health of the riders and the health of the city, but only if the streets are safe to ride on. There's a huge difference between a shared bike lane and a protected bike lane. I feel so much safer when I know the cars cannot crowd me out or force me into the gutter along the side of the road. New Orleans has to step up and implement the Complete Streets program. We can be the leading city. That is our heritage. Next comment is Philip Freemer, not a paid representative. Our streets must be designed to allow for the safety of all residents, including pedestrians, bicyclists, and people using public transit. I'm in favor of data-driven, equity-focused plan. Next comment is by Rika Triggs, a paid representative. The American Heart Association has been committed to advocating for complete streets in our communities. Our New Orleans board and staff have worked in cooperation with the administration and council members over the past 2 years to develop a comprehensive policy that will help to create a safe, equitable, multimodal transportation network. We believe in streets built to share, an approach that requires consideration for all users of all ages, races, genders, incomes, abilities, and disabilities. These improvements will provide for increased opportunities for physical activity. We know that being physically active daily reduces the risk of coronary heart disease, hypertension, stroke, and obesity. COVID has highlighted health inequities in our communities. We feel strongly that this policy should clearly define and implement projects equitably. Many of our city's most vulnerable population lack well-maintained routes to better health. In working with the Complete Streets Coalition and using the national model best practices from Smart Growth, we would like to ensure that equity and equity implementation is addressed. Additionally, we want to make sure clear high-level approvals are in place for waivers exemptions. We also want the working group's recommendations and input to drive the program. We appreciated everyone's work and commitment in this area, and we are eager for New Orleans to reap the benefits of a comprehensive policy rooted in safety and equity. The next comment is from Alexandria Price, not a paid representative. I moved back into the city because of its accessibility for bike riders and walkers. But seeing as our city was not necessarily built for safe driving and biking, walking, we are in dire need of safer streets. There is a chunk of our population who rely on their bikes or their own 2 feet as a mode of transportation. And if we cannot provide safe streets for our community to complete their daily tasks, then we're failing. Hopefully, safer biking streets will encourage folks to be more aware while driving. We can only hope for this and less vehicular deaths. Next comment is by Bart Everson, not a paid representative. I supported the original Complete Streets policy and I support this revision. I encourage the council to not just give lip service to the idea of equity, but make this policy as clear and specific as possible. That which gets measured gets done. In a similar vein, exemptions are realistic and necessary, but it also needs to be clear and specific. We need to know where the buck stops with exemptions. Finally, as a bicycle commuter, a founder of Friends of Lafitte Greenway, and a human being who walks around the city every day, I know all too well that we need to do better by cyclists and pedestrians in this city. You'd best have someone on the working group who represents the common pedestrian because our sidewalk situation is pathetic. Next comment is by Christopher Miller, not a paid representative. As a biker in this city, I use the streets and transportation infrastructure to move about the city. The streets and transportation infrastructure exist for many different types of traffic: walking, biking, driving, and riding transit. The city's historic layout has shorter blocks and narrower streets, which prioritizes last mile transportation. Most of this last mile is dedicated to foot and bicycle traffic. The Complete Streets Ordinance implementation would empower transportation at the individual level and result in compounded benefit for New Orleans as a whole. Next comment is from Daphne Young, not a paid representative. AARP Louisiana is pleased about the infrastructure improvements to create walking paths and protected bike lanes around the city, and we are looking forward to future installations. These advancements will help make sharing roadways safer for residents driving cars, walking, utilizing transit, and riding bikes. As a member of the New Orleans Complete Streets Coalition, we are urging the City Council to make sure that the NOCSC's core areas of concern are included in the updated policy changes to the Complete Streets program. First and foremost, we want to ensure that this policy is equity focused and inclusive of all ages, incomes, and neighborhoods. We would like the established Complete Streets Working Group to use national best practices and be empowered in their program recommendations. Finally, we would like to see performance metrics and accountability. The exemption process must be closely monitored and have approvals at a high level. As we serve in an advisory role, providing input for the policies, procedures, and regulations that are developed within the context of the Complete Streets program, we are confident that our concerns are addressed and our voices are valued. Next comment is from Almquist Evelyn, not a paid representative. Citizens getting killed while riding their bikes, walking or otherwise, don't promote the city in any way. Do we care about the safety of our citizens and tourists alike enough? We need to implement the Complete Streets initiative. I may live in Jefferson Parish, but I love to bike in New Orleans. New Orleans is a city to be seen from a bike or on foot. Let's be safe rather than sorry. Next comment is from Benjamin Sapper, not a paid representative. I encourage the council to fight for a Complete Streets ordinance that prioritizes bike and pedestrian safety. New Orleans will thrive as a pedestrian-friendly city on the future, and we've lost way too many people to accidents that could have been avoided by having safe, complete streets. Please get cars out of the French Quarter and create more car-free zones throughout the city. Use data to drive your policies and make a plan that is equitable. Make sure to think about the most vulnerable people in New Orleans, those without vehicles who need to navigate their neighborhoods on bike and by foot. Next comment is by Kevin Thibodeau, not a paid representative. I'm strongly in support of the Complete Streets policy. Thank you for taking the first steps to make New Orleans less car dependent. My comment is in regard to the following exception. Cost is excessively disproportionate to the need or probable use. This policy exception can be avoided where possible by ensuring that bike infrastructure is placed where there is proven use, especially in these early stages. Objective indicators such as bike traffic counters should be utilized in the planning stages for guidance on where to install bike infrastructure. Otherwise, my fear is that bike lanes will be unused and grown over by weeds and debris, therefore severely lessening popular support for bike lanes. At least initially, let's put the bike lanes where people are already biking the most. Thank you again. The next comment is by Casey Field, not a paid representative. We need protected bike lanes and more attention to the multitudes of vehicles parking and driving in the bike lanes we already have. The next comment is by Albert Camburn, not a paid representative. I support Complete Streets ordinance implementation. Next comment is by Emily McDonald, not a paid representative. Protected bike lanes must be included in the changes being made to keep New Orleanians safe. Every year we lose an unacceptable number of lives to car/bicycle collisions. And to be clear, the acceptable number is 0. I'm among the many in this city who have had to bury a loved one killed by a car. And I'm telling you, painted lines are not enough to keep cyclists safe in a landscape dominated by aggressive, drunk, careless, and speeding drivers. Frankie Fisher died in one of our city's existing bike lanes last year. So did David Hines. So did Cherie Walls. New Orleans must prioritize protected bike lanes now. Next comment is by Sherry Ben Isau, not a paid representative. Please move forward with a reasonable, planned, workable, Complete Streets program. Next comment is by Willis Ray, not a paid representative. I would like to see our streets made safer for all people, pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles by creating a Complete Streets ordinance. Next comment is by Quentin Price, not a paid representative. I support the Complete Streets program. I believe the city of New Orleans needs more and better protected bike lanes. Next comment is by Thomas Coates Welsh, not a paid representative. Members of the City Council, thank you for addressing the Complete Streets policy with the seriousness it deserves. 3 cyclists have been killed by cars on our streets in the last few weeks. I commute to work daily by bike and ride thousands of miles a year on New Orleans streets. Thoughtful street planning and protected bike lanes save lives every single day. I urge you to include the following in a new Complete Streets policy. A clear definition of what equity means and how it will be achieved with specific data criteria. An exemption process that has transparency and accountability. Lastly, an empowered working group. Walking and cycling advocates should have a meaningful say and veto power in the evaluation of this policy. Thank you for your time. The next comment is by Robert Hennig Bell, not a paid representative. A strong complete streets policy and well-implemented complete streets program in New Orleans will ensure that everyone who lives here and everyone who visits will be tangibly safer and with more accessible options for getting around, and in New Orleans made more sustainable for generations to come, not only for biking, but for all the ways people move around communities. We believe a formalized approach to building complete streets with an established data collection and sharing process and a design guidance for walking, biking, and transit infrastructure will ensure that safe biking, walking, and transit infrastructure reaches all New Orleans communities, especially those most in need of additional mobility options. Complete streets is a shift in philosophy away from a hierarchy in how roads have been built in America, planned almost exclusively around cars with everything else in the dust. It's a 21st century movement in line with others seeking to level the playing field for all people, regardless of their background, their physical ability, income, or zip code. It is an opportunity to provide opportunity, mobility, and a sustainable future here in New Orleans. We're excited to hear more about Mayors Cantrell and the Department of Public Works' vision of a new complete streets policy for New Orleans and how it will be implemented. Bike Easy strongly supports the adoption of data-driven, equity-focused policy while noting a few areas of concern. How is equity defined? The proposed policy mentions equity, but we're unclear what exactly the city means. We believe equity must mean utilizing specific data to drive decisions about complete streets projects, such as race, income, ADA access, distance from a transit line, or a park or a grocery store, etc. An accountable exemptions process. We understand the policy about public works will include exemptions. What's needed is accountability for the process and granting them. An officer public appointee needs to be clearly accountable in case exemptions are abused. The Complete Streets Working Group shall be empowered to establish the program, not merely make recommendations. The city proposes to include stakeholders in a working group tasked with creating the new Complete Streets program. What Complete Streets will look like in New Orleans, what is measured, and ultimately who they will serve depend on how well the working group establishes the program. As an example of an effective dynamic to ensure walking safety and access is properly addressed, local walking advocates should not only be included in the working group, but all able to ensure that sidewalk maintenance, miles of walking trails, and other walking related issues are included in relevant program practices and tracked within the city's publicly shared evaluation framework. Thank you. Next comment is by Angela Kyle, not a paid representative. This statement is made on behalf of Playbuild, a Complete Streets Coalition member since 2018. We are a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission of transforming vacant lots into play-based learning environments for 4 to 12-year-olds. From fall 2018 to fall 2019, we worked with the Mayor's Office of Youth and Families, Tulane School of Architecture, and global engineering firm Arup on a strategic initiative to identify opportunities to improve city infrastructure with the goal of making New Orleans a more child-friendly city. As a part of this effort, we convened a cross-sector stakeholder group of city agency leads, youth advisory board members, and community members in a workshop to identify tangible challenges and opportunities towards this goal. The number one challenge identified was safety and lack of safe mobility options. This challenge equates to a lack of autonomy and agency for our young people because they are unable to navigate their immediate environs. Our organization works in the Central City neighborhood near the intersection of Claiborne and MLK, and our immediate vicinity is a microcosm of these challenges. Complex traffic patterns that make the intersection impassable, combined with broken sidewalks, lack of bike lanes, and street crossings, are issues that make our streetscapes less than hospitable for kids and families that we serve. The goal of Complete Streets is completely aligned to our goal of improving city infrastructure to improve the quality of life for kids and their caregivers. We also can say definitively from our work in Central City and comparing safety and access in our neighborhoods with other parts of the city that this is an equity issue. We are aware and thrilled that the change is coming to the MLK corridor and believe that it presents an unprecedented opportunity to assess the impact of the city's infrastructure efforts, specifically on the lives of kids and families that reside in this neighborhood. Benchmarking active mobility behavior as well as improvements in safety and accessibility in the area will help quantify the impacts of Complete Streets. These efforts will enable the city of New Orleans to prove how infrastructure investment dollars can deliver measurable quality of life improvements, not just for the city's youngest residents, but for all. Next comment is from Dr. Kate Iberg, not a paid representative. I support the Complete Streets initiative as I believe that all people in our community would benefit from safer access to all modes of transportation, including walking and biking. We have lost too many lives in this beautiful city as people are commuting or moving about for recreation. Please continue the good work in creating a complete streets policy that clearly defines equity, creates an accountable exemptions process, and establishes an empowered working group. Thank you for your time and consideration. The next comment is by Samuel Spencer, not a paid representative. A real complete streets policy is long overdue. The city having passed a one-page policy years ago and sought in it while vulnerable street users died due to the continued dominance and speed of cars in these allegedly public spaces. I commend the council for taking this matter seriously now and urge the adoption and, more importantly, the determinant not a paid representative. I support updating the complete streets policy and protocols and urge the council to include one policy measure for the periodic routine closure of selected streets to vehicular traffic. The objective of this measure would be to promote pedestrian and human-empowered forms of transportation, improve community health, reduce localized air and noise pollution, and reduce negative health impacts associated with localized pollution. And the last comment is by Christopher Parker, not a paid representative. Oslo, Norway, with a population of over 681,000 in the city proper, just had a year with one traffic fatality. A single driver crashed into a fence. There were no pedestrian deaths and no cycling deaths. Given our cultural and legal framework, we may never achieve what they did, but we can do better. Complete streets and engineering streets to control for speed is the first concrete step. We must continue to implement protected and raised bike lane, pedestrian islands, gated intersections, and a myriad of options that protect all road users. We must never allow apathy to convince us that we cannot do better. And that is all the public comment on this item.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew. I hope you have some water there. With that, council members, do we have any comments before we move on to the next agenda item? As I said, this is not, this is for information only as we progress through the process. Councilmember Banks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of comments. First, I want to be on record as publicly supporting the idea of enhancing the walkability, rideability, and safety on all of our streets. So I am fully in concert with the concept of incorporating safe practices for cyclists, motorists, and walkers. I do, however, have some concerns that no one has yet made me understand. In my mind, the side streets have a lower speed limit and less density. Why is it that we cannot look at having the side streets as designated as bike lanes? You cannot ride a bicycle on the interstate for the main reason that the bike cannot go as fast as the cars. So if that logic is real on the interstate, why wouldn't it be the same on the streets? That's comment number one. And comment number two is, no matter what we do as it relates to enhancing bike safety, what has to be a component of that is the fact that bicyclists have to be made aware that they are moving vehicles. They are obligated to obey all of the traffic laws. They're obligated to obey stop signs, one-way streets, all of the things that motorized vehicles have to adhere to, cyclists have to adhere to too. It has happened way too many times that, not just me personally, but too many other people have had chances to run into folks because cyclists are coming the wrong way on the street or run through a stop sign and all that kind of stuff. So I am 100% in support of this, but it's got to be comprehensive with having that educational component for the cyclists to make them understand that you are part of the roadway. You've got to play by the rules of the roadway. So with that, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Banks. I do agree with you that education has to be a huge component of this as we move forward. I absolutely agree. I also think the safest way too is to get the bicyclists out of lanes of traffic, which is, I think, the real important thing about having protected bike lanes in a separate area. So I agree, not all streets are created equal in terms of which streets are going to be able to have a protected bike lane versus not, but thank you. Any other comments from any of the council members? I see Councilmember Williams has joined us. Councilmember, did you have any comments? I know you've been a big supporter of this since we passed it back in 2011.
Yeah, I appreciate you for just being dogged about it. If we don't do it, it's not going to get done. It's incumbent upon us to move forward on this. What's a term we said we're going to start using? We have to be more egalitarian with the roads, and this is that. I just thank you for your work on it.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, with that, we're going to go back in order of our agenda items. Councilmember Jeruso, I was going to turn this over to you regarding our truck routes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So the next item is truck routes, as Councilmember Palmer just said. I think the administration has a presentation as well on that. Dan, are you doing this one as well?
You're on mute, Dan.
Yes, I am, council member. Sorry, it took a second to unmute there.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
And I'm ready as soon as it's up on the screen.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm back, everybody. Thanks for entertaining presentation number 2 from me. Today's presentation, as Councilmember Jeruso said, is regarding the truck routes, and specifically a spring cleaning that we are proposing for the existing list of routes, as well as including an annual reporting requirement on the oversized vehicle permits. If we could go to the next slide. Starting off, just to put this in the context of the larger initiative that is underway around trucks and oversized vehicles, which began through conversations with Councilmember Jeruso and his staff and stakeholders in the community, both residents and businesses and freight companies themselves. We are engaged in a process to holistically look at our regulations and routes for trucks and oversized vehicles, do research, identify problems, and come back with initiatives and any changes to our approach or procedures to basically improve compliance of the truck route system, oversized vehicles. That could be accomplished through regulations, route changes, education, and outreach to our stakeholders, and then, of course, having enforcement when needed if we don't get the behavior change and improve compliance that we're all aiming to achieve. One of the early steps to this process is the ordinance before you today, which largely comprises of technical amendments, like I said, a spring cleaning of the existing truck route list. We want to make these changes here at the front end because the list has not been maintained as well as it could have been over the years, and a clean list moving forward here at the front end will better enable our ability to ensure that signage in the real world, our education and outreach efforts to stakeholders and to the general public, as well as our enforcement efforts, will be supported by us all having a common foundation to build on of a list and a map that is clear and intelligible to people, whether they're intimately familiar with the streets of New Orleans or otherwise. So that's kind of the broader context of how this fits in, how this particular ordinance fits into the larger process that is ongoing between now and November. Next slide, please. So the types of amendments included in this ordinance largely fall into the following categories: boundary corrections, name corrections, extended route, a grammatical correction, or an addition, consolidation, removal, or separation of a listing. And I'll describe them a little more in detail and provide some examples in the coming slides. I'm also happy to discuss the specific of any individual listing entry on the truck route listing that any of the council members may have as we go through this. So next slide, please. Just before we dive into it, I just want to note that the streets listed on the following slides are just a summary of changes. They're not necessarily included in their entirety as a truck route, so I don't want people to misunderstand. If you want to see the specific boundaries of a truck route, the current list is in the city code as part of section 154-1561, and then the proposed amendments that of this ordinance that we're discussing today is calendar number 33,107. Next slide, please. So the first category of changes are boundary corrections, and these are corrections to the boundary of a route, such as a street name change or for geographic accuracy. An example of this would be Basin Street, which is currently listed as between Canal Street and Toulouse Street. However, Basin Street is actually goes well beyond Toulouse Street to North Claiborne, where it then changes names to Orleans Avenue. So both the Basin Street and Orleans Avenue entries on the truck route list are being amended to properly reflect that accuracy of where the name change happens. That's just one specific example of the kinds of changes that are being made to the entries that are here listed on this slide. I did want to make one note. You'll see in that third column, South Jefferson Davis Parkway. The council, of course, passed an ordinance on the July 20th meeting to change the name of Jefferson Davis Parkway to Norman C. Francis Parkway. That name will go in effect on January 1st of 2021. This ordinance of technical changes is not going to change the name right now, because for the next 4 months, it will continue to be the Jefferson Davis Parkway. There are multiple other instances throughout the city code where Jefferson Davis Parkway is referenced, and all of those references will need to be updated to reflect the name change, and that can be done through a future initiative. And when we anticipate our stakeholder engagement will probably end up with other substantive changes to the truck route list that we would be coming back in a few months anyway with an ordinance that would make those substantive changes, and that would give us the opportunity to also update the name of Jeff Davis Parkway to reflect the new name that goes in effect on January 1. So I just wanted to highlight that to everybody for your awareness. The next slide, please. The next category of changes are name corrections, and these are corrections to the street name of a route or the street suffix. An example of this would be Burma Road. This is a former name of France Road, so we're removing that entry and adding in France Road later on. Another example of a smaller change, but again, we're really going for accuracy through and through. On Pontchartrain Boulevard, the current entry lists its one boundary as Veterans Highway. That roadway is actually Veterans Boulevard, so that is just a very minor technical change to ensure complete accuracy in the list. Next slide, please. There are two very small extensions to routes that are contained in this ordinance. The first one is on Calliope Street, which extends the truck route from its current termini at South Rampart to South Peters. This is, in fact, actually just really a technical change because Calliope Street and that portion serves as the service road of the Pontchartrain Expressway, and therefore is a state route and is already a truck route that just wasn't actually included in our list. But we wanted to make sure that was explained here. Then we also have West End Boulevard, which is currently a truck route, but is described in the existing list as from Polk Street to Conrad Street. Conrad Street is 1 block shy of Robert E. Lee Boulevard, which is also a truck route. So this change is filling in that 1 block gap, which really makes no sense because trucks traveling down West End, they get to Conrad Street, they have nowhere else to go. They're going to have to continue on to Robert E. Lee Boulevard anyway. So these are two actual small changes where we are adding some roadway to the truck route list. Next slide, please. The next category are grammatical corrections, and these are very basic changes, the epitome of the spring cleaning that we're doing through this ordinance. It includes things like making consistent the format of each entry, including some missing definite articles. An example of this that captures actually both of those types of changes is Nunez Street, where both the definite article referencing the parish line is added, and the format is being standardized with all the rest of the entries, describing it as Nunez Street between the Jefferson Parish line and Lamarck Street. We can go to the next slide, please. Then we get to the different types of listings, and this is a list of added entries, but not actually really additions to the street, to the truck route network. You'll see after the majority of these street names is a route number. All of those roadways are state highways, state routes. They are currently, as a state route, considered a truck route. They are just not in the list in the city code. So all these changes are just expressly listing out the state routes that exist in the city that function as truck routes, but are not currently captured by our list. There is two exceptions to that Religious Street, which is the one-way couplet of Tchoupitoulas, an existing truck route through the Lower Garden District area. So Religious Street just was neglected to be on the current list, but it functions with Tchoupitoulas Street as the truck route in either direction, both upriver and downriver. And then a small section of Washington Avenue, one block between the end of Toledano and South Broad Street. Again, a location where both Toledano and South Broad are truck routes that come within one block of touching each other. And this just is correcting that very obvious gap in the system. Next slide, please. This next group is a number of consolidated listings, and this is where a roadway had two different entries within the list unnecessarily. So just combining these into a single listing for clarity and ensuring that no one is misreading. So like I said, for example, Franklin Avenue, the current list of truck routes has two adjacent sections listed. One is the section below or from St. Claude Avenue to North Roman, and then a second listing for North Roman to Leon C. Simon, and we're just consolidating those into one entry. Next slide, please. This category is removing some listings from the truck list. Two of these, Brussels Street and Forstall, are actually being removed from the system. Those are both one-way residential streets that do not service any commercial or industrial use and have no corresponding truck route for the opposite direction. So that's why those two are being proposed for removal from the list. The block of General Ogden Street that is currently listed in the truck route doesn't actually exist in reality, so we're just removing that from the list. North Peters and St. Ferdinand Street are the segments being impacted here have actually already been removed. The current section 154-1561 has a subsection B that lists truck routes that have been previously removed. That creates some confusion because you have to look at two different lists. So we're just actually removing the streets from the main list instead of having the secondary list in subsection B. And Victory Drive is being removed. It is a former name of General de Gaulle, which already has its own listing. And then similarly, being removed are some duplicate entries, Camp Street and Toledano, where the same section of road is covered twice by two different entries on the truck route list. Next slide. The final category of types of edits are separated listings. And these, again, are going back to creating geographic accuracy in the listing of the streets. An example here, Andrew Higgins Boulevard between St. Charles Avenue and South Peters is currently included in the Howard Avenue listing in the truck route. We are separating those two into a Howard Avenue listing and an Andrew Higgins listing for clarity and accuracy. Same thing, another good example of that is LB Landry over in Algiers. That is currently in the truck route list solely as Whitney Avenue. However, it is LB Landry from the Jefferson Parish line to Newton Street and Whitney Avenue from Newton Street to Patterson. So again, making that change for accuracy and clarity. Next slide. This map is it reflects everything that is included in this proposed ordinance. Like I said, we're not making any real substantial, with the exception of a block or two, substantial changes to the network. It's all these spring cleaning technical accuracy changes, some of which were necessary to properly depict truck routes on the map. So that if the council adopts this ordinance, once it is signed by the mayor and certified, this updated map would be posted online as well as the corresponding digital GIS map. Next slide, please. The other portion of this ordinance, after the spring cleaning corrections to the list, is a new proposed subsection B on around annual reporting of permits. That's a subsection B to section 154-1524. And what this subsection will do is require an annual report be prepared by the Department of Public Works, which addresses the permits that have been issued pursuant to the provisions and conditions imposed by the city code around oversized vehicles. And that report will be submitted to the Clerk of Council by April 1st to cover the previous year. That is our presentation on the truck routes proposed amendments. I'm happy to answer any questions that any members of the committee have.
Well, Dan, I just wanted to say thank you for a thorough presentation. I couldn't imagine there were 8 slides worth of streets in the city that needed technical changes, but I'm glad to see the thoroughness that you and Transportation and DPW brought to this. I think it's appreciated by all of us. I appreciate also the idea about the permits. I just want to make sure when we get our first report in April, assuming that this passes, that there's sort of the capability to report on enforcement, that the department is able to capture some of that information. Can you just talk a little bit about what is planning to be done so that way the public knows about what's happening with the permits themselves and how truck routes are being enforced?
Sure. So that provision does connect into the broader conversation we're having. And there are opportunities that report can be more expansive in the future. Right now, based on what is collected when an applicant applies for a permit, that is what this reporting through DPW will be able to capture. There are other, and we've made some changes to the online permit system to better capture data to help inform our understanding and management of the permits that are being issued to help with our messaging, with our compliance and enforcement. As we move forward in the broader truck route oversized vehicle process, I think we will identify other issues, including some of the ones that you have mentioned previously about how to monitor how those permits are being used by the applicants themselves, and identifying areas where there may not be compliance and reporting on that as we can. So that will ultimately involve input from and data from other departments besides just Public Works. So I believe it'll be an ongoing conversation through that process of what data how we can best and efficiently collect it so that it is informative to our management and enforcement efforts.
Thanks, Dan. And would this same thing apply to the public, that if they're seeing something that isn't right or truck going places that it shouldn't or get stuck, 311 is the primary focal point to use?
Yes, and we're going to be developing some more specifics around that. And part of our outreach to the community will be, hey, you see a vehicle that, or a truck or an oversized vehicle that you think is not where it is supposed to be, and you want to report it through 311. Here's the kind of information that if you're able to get these details and share it in that 311 report, it'll make it easier for the city to follow up on that potential violation and investigate it and hold the truck operator accountable if the circumstances warrant it.
Thanks, Dan. Any
Thank you,
questions?
Councilmember.
Yeah, appreciate it. Any questions?
No, I don't. I just want to thank you, Joe, for doing this. This is going to really improve a lot of folks' quality of life and kind of give us a clear pathway on how to move forward. And thank you, Dan. I know there's a lot of cleanup work on this one.
I appreciate it. Do we have any public comment before we get to, we have an amendment and then the ordinance itself. The amendment is very, very short.
No public comment.
All right, great. Well, then with that, I would move on the amendment, which adds literally 3 streets to that long explanation Dan just gave. Very well done. May I have a second to that, please?
I'll second that, Joe.
Seconded by Council President. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
No opposed. Thank you very much. And then I will move on the ordinance, which is calendar number 33107. May I have a second?
Second, Joe.
Second by Councilmember Moreno. All in favor?
Aye.
No opposed. Thank you very much. Dan, really appreciate your work on this. Thank you to the administration.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you so much. All right, now we're going to move to the discussion of our slow ordinance, our slow zones from the French Quarter. Who are we having? We have the administration here to present on this.
It's me again, council member. You're going to be very tired
We're
of me.
giving you a workout today, Dan. We're giving you a workout. Just as a brief introduction though, folks, I just want to state that the administration has been really looking at how we can improve our quality of life in different neighborhoods, and the French Quarter is one of those. And really looking at how we can work towards creating a better environment for our residents, for our visitors, and also for our businesses. And so I think it's really important to look at this holistically. It's a multifaceted approach. I know we're referring a lot to this pedestrianization plan, but there are many different pieces to this plan. And so I know there's some pieces that some people are still trying to work through. There are other pieces that that we can move quickly on and that have a lot of support. And this is one of those. And so, which is talking about creating and establishing neighborhood slow zones, which is something that we can lower the miles per hour on our streets, and it can make it safer for everybody who lives there and visits there and work there. So with that, Dan, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Okay, thank you, council member. Again, Dan Jontris with the Office of Transportation. Thank you for inviting us to come and speak today about the neighborhood slow zone ordinance. If we could go to the next slide. This initiative, the neighborhood slow zones, fits in directly with one of the core themes of the Moving New Orleans Transportation Action Plan, and that theme is safety, where we are seeking to create safer street networks for people, whether they're walking, riding, or driving on those streets. Next slide. So what I'm gonna cover in this presentation this afternoon is start off with an overview of speed management and its relationship to safety, the links between this proposed ordinance and other safety initiatives underway in the city and by the administration, looking at the crash data for the area being addressed by this ordinance, and then talk about neighborhood slow zones themselves and the accompanying education, outreach, enforcement, and evaluation that we would be doing alongside the implementation of the slow zone, and then what the next steps would be should this ordinance be adopted. So next slide, please. So speed management. Speed is fundamentally linked to safety. We know through crash data and studies conducted across the country and across the world that higher speeds increase the likelihood of a crash and higher speeds increase the severity of a crash. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, NHTSA, their studies have determined that speed is a factor in 25% of traffic fatalities nationwide. That study also demonstrated that a person hit by a car traveling at 35 miles an hour is 5 times more likely to die than a person hit by a car traveling at 20 miles an hour. And this risk is higher, this risk of death is higher at any speed for older pedestrians and crashes involving large vehicles, which includes SUVs and pickup trucks, which are ever increasing in popularity on the streets of our city, our state, and around the country. But by managing speeds, we can help save lives. A 10% reduction in the average speed results in 19% fewer injury crashes, 27% fewer severe crashes, and 34% fewer fatal crashes. Next slide, please. So just some visuals to help show how speed impacts safety. And these come from the NACTO City Limits publication. NACTO is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, an organization of which the city is a member. So first impact on safety is that crashes at higher speeds are more forceful and thus more likely to be fatal. So that basically what I said earlier, that higher speeds have a greater likelihood of severity and injury associated with a crash. The second impact is that when drivers are traveling at higher speeds, their field of vision narrows. So as the speed increases, that field of vision continues to narrow. The graphic here will show you that at 25 miles an hour, a person driving a vehicle has about 100-degree field of vision outside of their car. When they increase that speed up to 45 miles an hour, that field of vision narrows down to 65%. So that makes things in the periphery of a driver's vision harder for them to detect and identify as something that could end up in the path of the vehicle. Next slide, please. And then how that plays out, while a driver is less likely to see something, once they do see something, a higher speed, a vehicle is going to travel further before the driver can react to something unexpected. You'll see that chart below, that reaction time is the white portion of the bar graphs. And you see how that reaction time covers a greater distance as speed increases 20, 30, and 40 miles an hour. And then even more notable, beyond that reaction time, there's a longer braking distance for vehicles once the driver does react and starts braking. And that braking distance increases significantly at higher speeds. That's the orange portion of the graph on the screen. Next slide. So how does it really play out at different speeds, especially compared to speeds that we often encounter here in the city, both posted speed limits and operating speed limits. As you can see, at 40 miles an hour, if someone is struck by a car, there's an 85% chance of that being a fatal crash, and then a 15% chance of injury. So basically, at 40 miles an hour, there's 0% chance that someone is not injured or killed if they're struck by a vehicle. At 30 miles an hour, those numbers drop down. It's a 45, but still significant percent chance that a fatality will result, a 50% chance that an injury will result, and only a 5% chance that there'll be no injury or fatality. At 20 miles an hour, the chance of a fatality drops down to 5%. The chance of injury is at 65%, and the chance of no injury is at 30%. So we really see that impact there between 20, 30, and 40 miles an hour on the likelihood of someone that is struck by a car being injured or killed. And this comes from the University of North Carolina's Highway Safety Research Center. So next slide, please. So how does the neighborhood slow zone concept fit into the city and the administration's other transportation safety initiatives? I already mentioned one is the Moving New Orleans Transportation Action Plan, and that safety is one of the 4 core themes of that plan. We are looking to implement proven crash reduction countermeasures. These are countermeasures that the Federal Highway Administration has done research on and promotes amongst state and local governments as proven countermeasures, one of which is reducing speeds to have a positive safety impact. Another one of our initiatives is the Local Road Safety Plan. This is currently under development with the Regional Planning Commission. And this is a data-driven process that we're going to use to identify and prioritize locations for safety countermeasures on the local road network. Those are streets that the City of New Orleans controls, as opposed to roadways that the Louisiana Department of Transportation controls. And then once we have that data-driven identification and prioritization, there are not insignificant resources available through federal transportation safety funds that we will be able to apply for and make a very strong case for our proposals, because we will have this data-driven plan underpinning the projects that we propose. And then another initiative, and this one is just about to kick off in the next few weeks, the Safety Data Initiative with the United States Department of Transportation. This is a grant that the city was awarded, and we'll be building on our efforts with the Local Road Safety Plan. And what we will be doing with this grant-funded project is developing a high injury network and integrating a risk prediction model. And that will further help us identify and prioritize projects, not solely based on what the past history of crashes have been, but also try to be more proactive with this prediction model and identify factors that contribute towards the likelihood of a crash, so that we can be proactive and implement countermeasures before something happens. Next slide, please. So the ordinance today is looking at not just establishing neighborhood slow zones as a concept, but also establishing a specific neighborhood slow zone in the French Quarter. So we wanted to take a look at the crash data for that area to really put in context what the scale of the magnitude of crashes are. So between 2014 and 2018, 5 years of data in the French Quarter, there were almost 4,400 crashes, resulting in just over 1,400 injuries. Of those injuries, 236 were moderate and 33 were severe, and 3 people were killed in those crashes. And we've broken up the French Quarter then into the perimeter streets, being Canal Street, North Rampart Street, and Esplanade, and the interior streets being any street bounded by those 3 perimeter streets and the Mississippi River. So the breakdown between the perimeter streets and the interior streets are in these second 2 columns. Just over 1,900 crashes on the perimeter streets, 730 injuries from those crashes, of which 115 were moderate and 14 were severe, and resulting in 1 fatality. And then on the interior streets, just over 2,400 crashes, 690 injuries, of which 121 were moderate and 19 were severe, and 2 fatalities. You could go to the next slide. This bar chart is just showing the same information to give a sense of how the interior streets in each given year, these are the total number of crashes of the interior streets, which is the dark orange, and the perimeter streets, the light orange, compare to each other. So we can see that consistently year after year, the interior streets of the French Quarter are having a large and consistent share of the total number of crashes occurring in the French Quarter. The next slide, please. So this map depicts crash locations. You can see that there are a lot of crashes there. As we said, this covers the 2014 to 2018 data. So within that blue highlighted box around the French Quarter, that does represent the 4,370 crashes. You can see some various averages there along the side that bring in some other data sources, averaging out some of these numbers on an annual basis. And then some demographic information about the area. We've got 3,400 people living in this area with almost 7,000 jobs. About 30% of the people living in this area are car-free households, and 5% of whom use bicycles for transportation, 2% using transit for their primary transportation, and 12% of residents living with a disability. So a lot of different users with different transportation needs, and giving us a lot of good reasons why we need to address transportation safety holistically, but right now specifically in this area where we have a very concentrated number of crashes. Next slide. Just a little more context around the crash data, going back to some of those initial things, initial studies about the impact on vulnerable users, which are people that are not in another car. So these are people on this slide, injuries to people walking when they're involved in a crash with a car. You can see on broken down by, again, the perimeter streets and the interior streets. So on the interior streets, two fatalities resulting from crashes, 7 severe injuries, 70 moderate injuries, and then almost another 140 injuries over this time period involving people walking on the streets of the French Quarter. And then similarly on the 3 perimeter streets of the French Quarter, 8 severe injuries, 39 moderate injuries, and 59 other injuries to people walking on those 3 streets. Next slide. Then for people bicycling, we see a similar breakdown on the interior streets, 1 severe injury, 29 moderate injuries, and 113 other injuries. And on the perimeter streets, 2 severe, 18 moderate, and 60 other injuries. So a large number of people that are these vulnerable users on foot, on bike, when involved in a crash that are resulting in these injuries. That next slide. That brings us to the ordinance specifically in question here this afternoon. What this ordinance seeks to do is create 2 new sections of code. One would be section 154-547. And this actually establishes neighborhood slow zones. So it allows DPW to establish such a zone. And this, again, is all part of, it gives us an additional option in our toolbox to help improve safety on the roadways. In these neighborhood slow zones, the driver of any vehicle shall not exceed the posted speed limit, and DPW would be directed to erect signage at all the entry points to such a zone with the posted speed limit. The second part of the ordinance, following the model of the city code, establishes a list of where these neighborhood slow zones would exist and what the speed limit within that zone would be. So if you could, go to the next slide. So for this initial ordinance, while the program is set up and could be replicated elsewhere, initially we're proposing to establish a neighborhood slow zone in the French Quarter. And that zone would be the streets bounded by, but not including Canal Street, North Rampart Street, Esplanade Avenue, and the Mississippi River. And it would establish a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit on all the streets within that boundary. Beyond just establishing the speed limit, then the next steps that we would be taking would be creating neighborhood gateways. And this is at entry points into that zone where we would look to narrow the roadway to be creating that visual cue that you are entering an area that is this neighborhood slow zone with a lower speed limit. We would have signage and pavement markings at those entry points and within the zone, reminding people of the neighborhood slow zone and of the 15-mile-an-hour posted speed limit. And we would monitor speeds to evaluate the impact and determine the need for any additional countermeasures.
I'm on the call.
As I mentioned, while this ordinance establishes one neighborhood slow zone in the French Quarter, there's no reason that in the future, through the review of crash data and community engagement, other additional candidate slow zones could be identified and established via ordinance. Next slide, please. This slide just provides a visualization for people to comprehend what that would look like. So again, the perimeter or the boundaries of this neighborhood slow zone would be Canal Street, North Rampart Street, and Esplanade Avenue. Each of those streets would at this time maintain their current posted speed limit of 35 miles an hour. It would be the streets within that boundary area that would be changed to 15 miles an hour from the current 25. Next slide. So beyond the physical changes that would accompany the speed limit change if this ordinance is adopted, we would want to be doing education and outreach. We want to make sure that our residents and the public at large explain to them the purpose of these changes, give them some of the context like that we were just discussing about the role that speed plays in our traffic safety, and have that education and outreach promote the behavior change that we ultimately want to see, which is reducing driving speeds in the slow zone in order to reduce the number of crashes and save lives and prevent injuries. Some enforcement would be necessary, of course, and NOPD, both their traffic division and the 8th District, can play a role in both education and enforcement in order to promote that behavior change that we want to see. And as I mentioned a slide or two ago, there will be evaluation that would be conducted, monitoring speeds at various locations to identify the level of compliance that we're getting. And then that would help inform any additional efforts that we need around education, outreach, and enforcement, as well as any potential other physical countermeasures to the street that might be necessary to implement to achieve the end goal of the reduced speeds and to reduce our crashes. So the next steps on, next slide, please. If this ordinance is adopted, the infrastructure changes that would accompany it at the front end would be signage and pavement markings and the gateway treatments. The education and outreach would rely heavily on engagement with French Quarter stakeholders, residents, businesses, et cetera, as well as media engagement to really get a broad understanding of that the change is happening, why the change is happening, and how people need to adjust their behavior for everyone, including their own safety. And then there have been comments and discussions already about the perimeter streets themselves, Canal, Rampart, and Esplanade. And while this ordinance is not proposing any immediate changes to those roadways, some of the other concepts being discussed as part of the Reimagining the French Quarter conversation have raised the idea about countermeasures being implemented on those perimeter streets and or posted speed limit changes, all of which would likely only complement the neighborhood slow zone within the French Quarter itself. That is my overview of the neighborhood slow zones, and I'm happy to answer any questions that any of the committee members have.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you for. Did you hear me?
Yes, Councilmember Williams, go ahead. I can hear you.
I just want to commend you for the detail with which you laid that out and the work you've been putting into it. That was very clear and a whole lot of work. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we want to make sure that people understand there is a very safety-driven, safety-rooted rationale behind all this. We don't want people to think this is just an attempt to create speed zones or speed traps and issue tickets. Our goal is to increase the safety. So we wanted to make sure that everyone really understands the numbers and the rationale behind this concept.
I really liked all the data. I think it really shows very clearly the types of accidents that are happening down there. And I like the fact that the administration is really focused on that. I think it's something that we might be able to apply to other areas and neighborhoods. What I would like to see is if there've been any studies between first, obviously, and primarily we're about safety, second, and quality of life. But after that too, I'm curious if slow zones also help with the economic environment of a neighborhood. And I think that's something that the French Quarter, when you go and start talking to them and educating them, it's going to be really important too, because our businesses down there are hurting. And I know that when you have a more pedestrian friendly environment, it also helps with small businesses along that corridor. So that would be something to see if there are any studies or data that reflects that as well, Dan.
Yeah, I don't immediately know offhand if there's any studies that directly connect neighborhood slow zones to economic activity. There are studies that have connected, like you said, when an area is made more walkable and more bikeable. Studies have shown that increases economic activity because people that walk or bike to businesses end up doing so more frequently, and therefore become or patronize businesses more frequently on that corridor or in that neighborhood, and really getting people on foot or on bike as opposed to just passing through in a car does result in increased economic activity in an area.
Right.
And patronage of businesses.
Council members, any other comments, questions? Do we have any public comments? Paul, I think you're going to read. I think Andrew had to go pick up his kids.
That's right. We have 6 public comments on this one.
All right.
First comment is from Rowan Polar, not a paid representative. Streets should be made safe for the people of New Orleans. Every road traffic death could be prevented if the city of New Orleans invested in its citizens instead of its vehicles. Safe streets for all. Robert Henning Bell, not a paid representative. Bike Easy strongly supports neighborhood slow zones. Slower speeds reduce both the number of crashes and their severity. This is of critical importance to the biking community. We hope that this ordinance serves as a blueprint for the establishment of additional slow zones across New Orleans, not simply for the safety of people biking, but for everyone on the road. Laurel Pang, not a paid representative. Cities like Toronto and Boston dropped their speed limits a mere 5 miles per hour and saw a drastic reduction in injuries and deaths. New Orleans has a speed problem. We need to extend slow zones outside the quarter to places like schools, playgrounds, parks, anywhere that sees heavy usage by pedestrians, particularly children. Jeff Dye, not a paid representative. I support the creation of slow zones in multiple areas throughout the city. I respectfully suggest that line 18 in the proposed ordinance be edited to remove the reference to Rampart Street and, in its place, expand the proposed slow zone to Claiborne Avenue. Lines 16 through 19 would then read, streets bounded by but not including Canal Street, Claiborne Avenue, Esplanade Avenue, and the Mississippi River. Christopher Parker, not a paid representative. I strongly encourage passing the ordinance to allow the creation of slow zones. I would encourage modification to the ordinance to allow creation of slow zones more widely. Cities like Boston, Atlanta, Toronto, Portland, and London have all used speed reduction as an ingredient in reducing traffic injury in their cities. I'm tired of year after year finding New Orleans as ranked as one of the most lethal places for people of all transit modalities. We have seen improvement in recent years, but we can do better. Acknowledging that reducing speeds in areas with vulnerable road users is a good step, and we should do it in the French Quarter, and we should do it anywhere else in the city where there is concentration of vulnerable road users. Glade Bilby, not a paid representative. With the increase in the number of tourists in the French Quarter, there are multiple reasons why there should be a safer and enforceable speed limit signage plan applied to the French Quarter and the Marigny. With all the variety of ways our streets in the French Quarter are used to get people from place to place, cars are a predominant and necessary mix. narrow streets on a grid from 300 years ago, the increase in tourists to 1.5 million per month, and the year-round selling of the French Quarter and expansion to the Marigny has caused this area to be in desperate need of a plan to ensure the safety of both the residents and the tourists. Proper signage and a lower speed limit will go a long way in improving the quality of the experience for both groups. It is incumbent on the city administration to ally with the businesses and residents of the French Quarter to do whatever it can to ensure that the French Quarter is maintained and appreciated for its historical integrity and architectural uniqueness. In order to raise the level of appreciation of the jewel in the crown of New Orleans, a program of speed limit signs of historic district 18 miles per hour should be posted throughout the French Quarter and the Marigny Triangle. These odd number speed limit signs will not only slow traffic down, they will also bring awareness to the fragile and historic nature of the areas already burdened by over-tourism. The increased need to resupply the French Quarter hotels, restaurants, and bars on a daily basis has put an overwhelming burden on our already poorly maintained streets. The excessive speed of delivery trucks, beer trucks, garbage trucks, street cleaners, and water cleanup vehicles causes all of the buildings in the French Quarter to vibrate and shake. However, it makes no sense to have the speed limit remain 35 miles per hour on Esplanade Avenue. Currently, pedestrians, bicycles, pedicabs, carriages, segways, and various individual mobility devices use Esplanade Avenue as a main thoroughfare. At least, if a plan is to be implemented, stick with what was initially proposed at 20 miles per hour. There are a tremendous number of people on bikes that use Esplanade Avenue, and a lower speed limit will certainly benefit them, save lives and property. Thanks. Last comment is from Anthony Doby, not a paid representative. Hello. Streets in my neighborhood are becoming an issue more and more these days, but the biggest issue at the present moment is at the corner of Abundant Street and Elysian Fields by Suds Car Wash at 3001 Elysian Fields Avenue. There's a fire hydrant at this corner that must have a leak under the street because there is sitting water on the street constantly. There is an open sore of a pothole that was just filled 3 days ago by city crews, and within 24 hours, water began to be visible on the surface once more. Now it is already back to puddling nonstop. We need to stop tossing hot blacktop on the problem and finally fix it. Further down the street at the corner of Abundance and Marigny Street, a patch has a basketball-sized hole that was filled the same day as the other hole was in the street 3 days ago. This too already has a bowl where filled. These are issues that our District D City Council reps should be working on getting fixed, not creating new issues by drunkenly joyriding across the neutral grounds and trying to kill people driving home from work. It would be great to hear some of your ideas and plans to fix the leaking pipes underground so we don't continue to waste time and money on tactics that are not working. Thank you. That's all the public comment.
All right, thank you so much, Paul. With that, I think I'm turning over to the last item, Councilmember Giarrusso, since we're doing a co meeting here. Oh, wait, no, I take that back. I do have to vote on this. I'm sorry, Councilmember Banks.
I just wanted to point out, Madam Chair, that all of those comments related to lower speeds saving lives. It goes back to what I talked about in the previous discussion. It makes sense to have the bicycles on streets that have lower speed limits. Now, why that is such an alien concept, I'm still not understanding, but every one of those comments relate to the fact that reducing the speed will help to save lives, but we want to put the bikes in the fastest lanes when we've got an option to put them in the slower ones. I just want to be clear on that again, maybe I'm not a traffic engineer, but if I add 1 and 1 and get 3, I figure something's out of order. And the fact is that slower speeds will save lives. We really ought to be looking at how to get the bikes out of the major thoroughfares and still have them being able to function, but not having to endanger folks with the fast traffic on the bigger streets. So I just wanted to be clear on that.
Thank you, Councilmember Banks. I agree with you. With that, do we want to, I need a motion to move this to council. So do we have a motion to vote?
I'd move, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council President Williams. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Giarrusso. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So it goes to the full council then for a vote. Thank you so much, Dan. We really do appreciate your time. This has been a marathon meeting for you, and we appreciate your thoroughness. All right, Councilmember Giarrusso.
Thank you. 2 things. One is, as a matter of housekeeping, I'd like to put the amendment to and the ordinance as amended 33107 on the consent agenda. We've talked about it twice now in meetings, so I think it deserves to go there. And secondly, I'm trying to shed my image as somebody who likes to have 7-hour-long meetings. So with that, DPW has graciously agreed to do the JIRR presentation at the next Public Works meeting, and it lets us all get out of here a little bit earlier. So if there's no objection to that, then I would suggest that we save that item for another day and that we move to adjourn with at the chair's pleasure.
I'm fine with that. Council members?
I'm fine with that, Joe, but it's not going to do much to dispel the fact that you like 7-hour meetings. So we're going to move it from a 9-hour meeting today to a 7-hour meeting the next time. And say la vie.
All right.
I'm with you, Wingman. I'm fine with moving it on to the next meeting.
I appreciate you. And I got a rep to protect. So it's all good. All right.
All right, do we have then I guess we have to just move to adjourn. Yes?
Yes.
Did we have to vote on moving the other one to the consent agenda? No.
No.
We already did that. Okay, thank you. Mr. Carter just told me we already did that. All right, so do we have a motion, please, to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember DeRusso, seconded by Councilmember Banks. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank y'all so much. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Councilmember DeRusso.